Welcome back into the Lions 24/7 podcast. I am Tyler Donahue. They are Tyler Calvaruso and Daniel Gowan. It's been a little while since we got this trio together. I think probably going back to camp season in the summer, things have changed. We have a bit of a different structure for you than you're used to on Wednesdays. We do still have a conversation coming your way later here on the episode. Our second segment, we will bring in a Nebraska insider, learn about where the Cornhuskers stand. They're working with a new quarterback right now, a true freshman quarterback. They've got a player playing at a Heisman Trophy type level. I don't think he's going to be in the Heisman Trophy conversation, but he's playing at that level right now at running back. And we will dive into some of the Matt Rule stuff. What were they hearing in Lincoln about a month ago regarding the Penn State job? Where are things trending for Matt Rule right now? Got a lot to break down. We'll also get a prediction from Lincoln as well. What does the Nebraska insider forecast for the matchup Saturday night in Beaver Stadium? Of course, we'll get you set up for that a little bit later this week with our third episode. Mark Brennan will enter the conversation. We will have seen a Penn State practice session by then. We'll have spoken to head coach Terry Smith by then as well, along with an assortment of players. But this segment that we're going to dive into right now with Tyler, with Daniel, it's going to center on the coaching carousel, which is spinning fast across the country right now. Penn State helped get it going about 5 weeks ago. It's been 38 days now since James Franklin was fired as Penn State's head coach. He now has a new job. Daniel brought it to our attention as we were closing out the Monday podcast as it was being reported. Franklin is the next head coach at Virginia Tech, and he is now there in Blacksburg. Just had a press conference on Wednesday morning, and he's already after pieces of Penn State's recruiting class and potentially pieces of Penn State's roster down the road. And we have a couple items to share as well as the staff movement is already happening. You're going to see some people going from Happy Valley to Blacksburg. That's already underway. And before further ado, Tyler, Daniel, thanks for taking the time. And Daniel, why don't we just jump right into that before we talk about James Franklin and the impact there? You were able to confirm just a couple minutes before we started recording that there is indeed already that trickle happening from the Lash building.
Yeah, Blue White Illustrated first reported that general manager Andy Frank and chief of staff Kevin Threlkill are headed to Virginia Tech. They're not in the Penn State staff directory anymore. And we got that confirmed independently. If you watched the introductory news conference for James Franklin down in Blacksburg, athletic director Whit Babcock was asked about modernizing the front office structure for the Hokies. And he mentioned that, I think James Franklin has someone in mind to be his general manager. Andy Frank had that GM title here at Penn State. I think that GM title and the responsibilities, it's probably changed a lot during Andy Frank's time at Penn State, especially with the rise of the portal and NIL. We'll see what Virginia Tech decides to do with that front office structure. We'll see what Penn State decides to do with its front office structure when they hire a new coach here. So I don't think those are going to be the only two guys that make the trip from State College down to Blacksburg. But I think when you talk about people that are closest to Franklin, Andy Frank was at Vanderbilt when James Franklin got there. Kevin Threlkill and Franklin date all the way back to Kansas State, which is, for Franklin, that's like 4 jobs ago. They were at Maryland together, Vandy, Penn State. So those are two of the, I guess you could call them Franklin guys. And I don't really think it's much of a surprise to see that movement.
Yeah, this is about as easy as projecting that Terry Smith was going to be the interim coach if James Franklin was let go. Like if you told me 5 weeks ago, write down the 2 names that'll be most likely to follow James Franklin to his next job, it would have been Andy and Kevin. And so good luck to them. We appreciate our interactions with them over the years here on campus, but you're going to start to see more of this, and it's going to be an evolving staff, an evolving roster. We're going to get into a lot of the things in play there, but let's dive into the fact that James Franklin is now situated in a new head coach job. Yes, he is out of the Big Ten Conference. He moves on to the ACC. He has experience at the SEC level, 3 years at Vanderbilt, nearly 12 in the Big Ten here at Penn State. But down at Virginia Tech in the ACC, that's a program that has not won 9 games since 2017. There's some work to be done there, but think about the path towards potentially being successful on a consistent basis, what you're dealing with from a competitive standpoint. It's going to be a different experience for James Franklin. We do wonder what the resources will look like ultimately for him down there with the Hokies and what he's going to be supplied for putting together a roster. putting together a staff and ultimately trying to sustain that. We know he was banging the drum for a lot of stuff here at Penn State. He talked about the alignment more recently with the president and the athletic director here in Happy Valley. Ultimately, wasn't able to equate to a national championship run here in 2025 and ultimately cost him his job. But when we look at him now being the man behind the mic of that press conference today in the basketball arena in Blacksburg, Daniel, you were glued to your TV for that one. We thought about you maybe going down that way. I think it was probably the right call for you to stay home, and we have things to do here on our campus and things to get done. We're going to practice later. What stood out to you from James Franklin's introductory press conference? And for those of you who are out there saying, who the hell cares, move on from James, it's still a pretty important conversation to have, and we're going to bring Tyler in a moment to talk about the impact that Penn State could feel from a roster and recruiting standpoint. And I promise you, we're going to get into other names regarding Penn State's next leader, what we're hearing from the coaching carousel conversation. But first, let's begin, Daniel. As I said, top takeaways from James Franklin's debut press conference as Hokies head coach.
Yeah, on social media, someone snarked at me and they're like, "Oh, are you moving to Blacksburg now? Yeah, you're still posting about Franklin and everything." And I think the blanket response is this is a guy that his next moves are going to affect Penn State in the immediate future, and he's also going to affect Penn State's long-term future in terms of the recruiting footprint still being in the region. So Franklin's someone that he's out of sight, but he is definitely not going to be out of mind for, I think, us and for Penn State for the foreseeable future. As for his introductory news conference, you have to give Virginia Tech some credit in terms of some cinema down in Castle Coliseum, which is a kind of a classic basketball barn from the 1950s. They got the lights down. They're playing Enter Sandman. Franklin walks into a bit of a light show with his wife Fumi. A pretty fun, I think, display. As for what he said, not a whole lot. In terms of concrete things, especially about Penn State. I put on social media, I did a control F for some version of alignment, aligned, align in my transcription document. I think I got 9 results from that. I saw some people had more, but it's a key theme, of Franklin. But you had some of the classic jokes and classic lines, high production, low maintenance. It's just kind of a classic Franklin presser and something that I'm sure Penn State fans would be pretty familiar with. Still, instead of being in the dark blue suit, he's in the dark charcoal suit. Instead of a blue tie, it's a maroon tie. He's got the maroon pocket square. It looks very, very different, and it feels different. So we'll see. Franklin did get asked a question, about maybe lessons that he learned or takeaways, and he leaned back on he has over a long career like the one he has, you are going to learn things. He didn't say anything specific. There's a good line from David Hale from ESPN. During his introductory or his opening statement, Franklin referenced having his notes app that had lessons he learned, different thoughts he had, and a staff list. And David Hale asked if he could shoot him over the staff list to make things a little bit easier. I think we would all like that. I think we all have some informed guesses on who might be on it, and I've already gotten confirmation on a couple of guys who are on it. But yeah, I mean, I think that Franklin is always going to win the opening press conference. I mean, that's just who he is. That's how he does things. When he's up at the podium, he's great. He got really emotional and teared up talking about Brent Pry and Brent Pry's father, and starting his career and being his coach. I don't really think I ever saw Franklin cry at the podium during my 5 years on the beat here. I think he might have gotten choked up a couple of times, but I think that's probably as emotional as I've ever seen him. So I think if you're a Virginia Tech fan, you come away from that feeling pretty excited and pretty ready for what's next.
And of course, we covered there was a very emotional press conference here at the Beaver Stadium media room on Monday with Terry Smith. You saw some of that from James Franklin. And let's be honest, it's not just feelings of happiness and excitement right now for James Franklin. I'd have to imagine there's a mixed bag of how he's feeling, realizing that he's starting fresh at a new campus, but that also means you're starting fresh in a lot of ways, building a foundation, putting together the culture you want. It's a long road ahead down there. We'll be monitoring him in the ACC. Not going to be the centerpiece focus for us anymore, but certainly I think a lot of people from the Penn State community are going to be curious to see what happens down in Blacksburg, especially as we start to add more members from the Penn State staff to that staff, familiar names from the recruiting trail, from the roster, to that collection down in Virginia Tech as well. And so, Tyler, let's get to that aspect. I know you waited 10 minutes here to have your word, but we had to cover a bit of ground there first. And now that James Franklin is there, getting his bearings, I know his wife was on the plane with him. Again, fresh start, but 5 weeks of kind of this waiting game to see where he would land has ended. And he said it during his press conference that, he 2 nights ago when this thing was officially official, I guess, on Virginia Tech's end, he was working the phones, talking to a bunch of the Virginia Tech commits that he's inheriting, talking to the best players in Virginia is the way he phrased it. And I think he made room in those conversations for some guys that either committed to him at Penn State or remain committed to the Nittany Lions. Talk us through, just before we get into some specific names here, what you believe could be the domino effect of James Franklin setting up shop here. He's not that far away removed from the region. You're going to be clashing with him a lot for similar players at familiar high schools. What do you think is the impact on the recruiting trail before we get to the impact a little bit later on the transfer portal and what we could see in terms of the roster here at Penn State?
Bare minimum, Virginia Tech becomes very much a nuisance to Penn State on the recruiting trail. You're already seeing it with Franklin hitting the ground running, trying to get some of these current and former Penn State commits to visit Virginia Tech and visit in short order. We've got some of those guys pegged to make it down to Blacksburg as soon as this weekend. Just this morning, I popped in a crystal ball prediction for Troy Hume, the former top 24/7 quarterback commit for the Nittany Lions, to land at Virginia Tech. So Franklin, which I think should come as absolutely no surprise to anyone who has followed his recruiting tenure throughout his time at Penn State, has hit the ground running. He's putting in the work, and he's trying to get his guys within Virginia Tech. And long term, he's going to run into Penn State a bunch on the trail because, like you teed up, DMV, Virginia, Tidewater area, these were all places Penn State frequented on the trail throughout Franklin's tenure as head coach. Remember, we're not too far removed from that 2023 cycle where Franklin and Penn State went down to Virginia and signed half of the state's top prospects. Some of those players panned out in State College, others didn't. But the fact remains, Franklin is in a place where he has juice on the trail, and that is going to directly impact Penn State. Now, at what level will it impact Penn State? I think a lot of that is going to have to do with, one, who the new hire is, and two, how Penn State's next head coach comes in and picks up where Franklin left off on the trail in terms of relationship building and being able to sell the vision for the program and the Penn State brand. Because that's something Franklin was very, very good at. And Penn State's next head coach will have to do the same and hopefully even build it up better if you're a Penn State fan. Obviously, that's what you hope. Make Penn State even more of a stronghold in the region. But the fact of the matter is simple. Franklin is now the head coach at a program where he's going to be running into Penn State quite often on the trail. Time will tell from a results perspective, but like I said, bare minimum, very least, Virginia Tech automatically becomes a nuisance to Penn State on the trail.
And I think we've already heard some rumblings. Former Penn State commit Troy Hume from the San Diego, California area, planning to get out to Blacksburg. There's some buzz that he may be a Virginia Tech commit when this is all said and done. I believe Tyler Peterson from up in Minnesota, a tight end commit, 4-star prospect, also now getting involved with Virginia Tech. Roseby Lubintis, former Penn State commit, also in contact with James Franklin. Is there anyone in this class other than Pierce that you feel like is susceptible to, maybe really opening that door for James Franklin and jumping over to the Hokies class?
Yeah, there are a few guys who I think fall into that category, honestly, more than a few. Messiah Mickens, 4-star running back right here in Penn State's backyard at Harrisburg. He has the longest standing relationship with Franklin as any Penn State commit in this class. And you got to remember, yes, Stan Drayton did a really good job picking up where Jaywan Sider left off, coming in as Penn State's running backs coach during the winter, keeping Mickens committed. But, James Franklin was at the center of that as well. So that's an intriguing possibility to me. The offensive line, guys like Marlon Bright, Ben Iziuka, who's going to be making an official visit to Virginia Tech beginning on Sunday. Not sure what's going to happen with Bright yet. He's due back at Penn State this weekend for a visit. We're keeping an eye on whether or not that visit is still going to occur because it was discussed if a fresh official visit opportunity presented itself, that's something Bright might pursue. Maybe that's Virginia Tech. nothing set in stone on that front yet. Monitoring those guys. Tyson Harley, defensive end, really, really talented pass rusher coming off the edge. He knows Virginia Tech well. There's no telling if Deion Barnes is going to be back as Penn State's defensive line coach next year. He's got a really good relationship with James Franklin. Maybe that's a landing spot for him. It's one I'm charting. Then Matthew Lama, the linebacker commit, who, again, another guy who frequented Virginia Tech at points in his recruitment. Very familiar with the program. Now Virginia Tech has a leader that Lama knows very, very well. Really good relationship there, not just between Franklin and Lama directly, but Franklin and the Lama family. It's something we saw with our own eyes when Lama camped at Penn State on several occasions during the summer. And then Matt Sieg, really, really talented safety commit from right here in Pennsylvania. Look, he's been very candid and very open about expressing his desire to not just see where Franklin was going to land, but visit that program. Well, he's got a landing spot now. Sieg, coming off an official visit to Notre Dame, could be at Virginia Tech as soon as this weekend. This one has turned into an outright battle. He's still keeping an eye on Penn State, still keeping an eye and see who that next head coach is going to be. And I think he'll give that next head coach a chance. But again, that signing period, December 3rd, it's inching closer. And Matt Sieg's exploring one of many, exploring additional options. And he's one to keep an eye on from the Virginia Tech perspective now that Franklin's in place in Blacksburg.
When we look at the recruiting picture, by the way, Kevin Brown is not going to Virginia Tech, but he's also not coming to Penn State anymore. The former top 100, or he's still a top 100 prospect, but the former lead member of the offensive commitment pack here at Penn State for a long time. One of the first guys that offered in the 2025 class, going back to his freshman year at Harrisburg, a guy that we have had feedback from the Penn State regime under James Franklin that they believe he can be an all-time type talent here with the Nittany Lions on the offensive line. He decommitted on Sunday after visiting a couple different schools. One of those schools was West Virginia. It's the alma mater of his father, who played offensive line for the Mountaineers, for Rich Rodriguez, who's back as their head coach now. And now Kevin plans to follow that path. And I can tell you, a few years ago, before Rich Rodriguez got there, and when Kevin Brown was sorting through options, West Virginia was not very highly viewed on his end at that stage. I think it was trending well toward Penn State at that point. But things have changed down there from a coach standpoint. Things have obviously changed here from a coaching standpoint. And he made a very nationally publicized decision this week on, I think it was Tuesday, announcing his commitment to West Virginia. So no matter what happens here in the next couple of weeks for the Penn State job, I have a hard time seeing him backing off of what he just did and committing to the West Virginia Mountaineers. And Daniel, the recruiting stuff is obviously a huge piece of the puzzle here. But we're also very curious about the roster impact, because there's guys that have 2 more games at least here as Nittany Lions. We got Nebraska coming to town. Then you've got a road trip to Rutgers. We'll see if they're able to earn a bowl invitation through that. And as we addressed on Monday, no one can technically enter the transfer portal until that January window opens up. But someone could certainly say, if they're playing in a bowl game the 3rd week of December, they could say on December 5th, hey, I intend to enter the transfer portal. Thanks, Penn State. I'm packing up my locker, and thanks for the memories. So what do you think is the next step here with James Franklin's impact on all the guys that, let's face it, he had a hand in bringing every single one of them to this campus?
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting. And I think that the area it could potentially hurt Penn State the most is in terms of depth. You look at the starting 22 right now, we've talked about it all offseason. There's a ton of guys that decided to come back for their final years of eligibility. So you're going to have, I think probably most of the starting lineup, a good portion of the starting lineup move on. 4 of those 5 offensive linemen are, either in their 4th or final years of eligibility. I know Venga Ioane has 1 more left, but I think we could see where he ends up. So it's going to be that next level, guys that we've talked about a lot, a Kobe Howard, a Chaz Coleman. I know Tyler C has done a lot of, good work in terms of laying out who this next coach needs to prioritize for retention. And so I think that's where, you'll see, I think in terms of potentially names moving on, it's not necessarily going to be Penn State's star power, because most of that star power wouldn't be back next year anyway. It's going to be guys that we talked about as being up next, guys that are part of the future, maybe guys that when Terry Smith talks about being part of the future, are, that future might be elsewhere. So I think that's where you start in terms of the impact on the roster, is looking at, all right, like who's on that 2 deep? Who's even on that 3 deep? Who just signed as freshman last year? That's going to be, I think, where it's really interesting to watch and where Penn State's incoming coach is going to have to do some work with retention.
Tyler, you have anything to add on the transfer portal angle in terms of guys who are currently here in State College and we're wondering firmly if they still will be? And now you got the James Franklin factor a few hours down the road.
No, I think Daniel hit the nail on the head. Guys who are from that area close to Virginia Tech, the younger guys on the roster who are depth pieces now, but profile as big pieces for the future. They're not too far removed from committing to Franklin. Now he's elsewhere, and I think that presents the opportunity for a fresh start for those guys reuniting with Franklin. And it's going to hit. I think this is going to be a busy offseason both ways. I think that kind of goes without saying. There's going to be a lot incoming. I think there's going to be a lot outgoing as well because Franklin carries a lot of pull. And again, just because a guy leaves or decides to leave doesn't automatically mean he's following Franklin to Virginia Tech. But I think plenty of these guys are going to be inclined to explore their options now that Franklin is no longer in place as the program's head coach. We'll see how the new head coach hire is received by some of the current players, but there's no telling until that indeed happens.
Let's talk about this coach search on Penn State's end, because that's the next step here. Until they have a firm full-time head coach plan in place, they're basically going to be caught in this in-between area where a school that has a guy like James Franklin is going to be able to come and sell you something more stable. Now, that could change in a couple of weeks. I still believe that 2 weeks from now, by that time, we'll be through Thanksgiving weekend. We'll be through the regular season. You'll still have some conference championships matchups coming that weekend. But I think that the deal will be done, or it'll be nearly done 2 weeks from now. And if we're sitting here 2 weeks from now and saying we don't know what's going on, then we'll just keep moving forward with our coverage. But it has been a wild ride. As I said, 38 days now into the process. There have been some big swings. I don't think it's any surprise. We haven't brought it to the podcast a ton. We've been locked in on our message board with a lot of commentary on our hot board thread, which is now over 4 million views. Thanks to everyone who's partaking in that and all the new subscribers and all the old ones who have been a huge part of the conversation. But when we look at that situation now, Mike Elko removed from it. He, for a while, felt like the top target in this conversation, a guy with Northeast ties down at Texas A&M, doing great things there. It's their best season since 1992. And as last week was starting to come to a close, we heard a lot more confidence coming from some connections that we have at College Station about him really not being in play for Penn State anymore. And by the time we got into the weekend, that was very clear that things had firmed up and Texas A&M had a contract extension ready to be signed. He signed it. And so he's not leaving Texas A&M barring some incredibly unforeseen circumstance. And they look like they're going to potentially have a bye week in the college football playoff if they can get through the next few games and maybe handle some business in the SEC championship. So Mike Elko goes toward the direction where we put Curt Cignetti earlier, a guy who's locked in with his current school. Now, never felt like there was a major journey down the path with Cignetti like there was with Mike Elko. But the other name, if we're talking big swings right now, guys, from my end that I continue to hear, and this is going back to the first week of this coaching search when we dropped an update on Lions247.com, is Kalen DeBoer. And things kind of quieted out a little bit there because what I was told initially a few days into the departure of James Franklin was that there is some room to leverage. There's some room to maneuver with Kalen DeBoer at Alabama, but it's probably going to require things going south for the Crimson Tide. And what did they do after that? Well, they won every game. They beat 4 consecutive top 25 teams. They went from 0-1 after a disastrous start against Florida State to being 8-1. And then last week, things hit a little bit of a rough patch against a ranked Oklahoma team. They lost by a few points. They dropped 8-2. Now their backs are against the wall a little bit in terms of getting to the college football playoff. They have no room for error. They got an FCS opponent on the schedule this Saturday. Next Saturday, they're at an Auburn team that has struggled, an Auburn team that fired their coach already. But it's the Iron Bowl, folks. And if you haven't paid attention, you kind of set a lot aside when Alabama and Auburn get together and compete. And so what I hear right now with Kalen DeBoer is you want the Auburn pom-poms on your hands on that Saturday, November 29th, if he's the guy who's your top target. And I think in terms of cachet, someone who would bring in the most clout, he is the guy right now, like Kalen DeBoer. He took Washington to a national championship game a couple years back with the help of Michael Penix in that process. He was an absolute monster at the FCS level prior to that. And he's somebody who has done it at various stops as an assistant coach before he was a head coach. And so when you look at Kalen DeBoer, again, if they beat Auburn, I think things kind of settle in a little bit because they're going to the playoff. And so Alabama's feeling okay. If they were to lose to Auburn, that's 3 losses this season after they lost 4 games last year. You're replacing the most legendary coaching figure in modern football in Nick Saban. And my read in communicating with some people in Tuscaloosa over the course of the last few days is that things could really reach a level of toxicity between him and the fan base that maybe there would be an off-ramp. An off-ramp is the term that was brought up to me 5 weeks ago, and off-ramp was reinforced to me this time. I'm not saying that Alabama would fire him, but I think that both sides could explore, well, from DeBoer's perspective, Penn State's a pretty good off-ramp for me. It would be a pill to swallow in terms of going down a step to a quote-unquote lesser program, and take off your blue and white glasses, folks. Going from Alabama and what they've accomplished lately to come to State College would be a perceived step down in that regard. But at the same time, I'm told that if they were to lose to Auburn, Alabama wouldn't exactly be wrapped around his legs screaming, don't leave, don't leave, don't leave. They may be getting the next guy. They probably already getting some ducks in the row for the potential next guy. So I'll just put that out there. Kalen DeBoer, to me, is the biggest swing remaining in play. If that changes, we'll bring it to you at lines247.com. The most consistent name in play has been Eli Drinkwitz, going back again to the first week of this process. Missouri's head coach. He's been there since 2020. If he wanted to sign a contract extension, it would have been announced already. It probably would have been announced a couple weeks ago. Missouri wants to keep him. He is playing the field right now a little bit because he's on the list for LSU. He's on the list for Florida. He's on the list for Auburn as well. What I'm told is he's in the 3 to 5 range at those schools. With Penn State, is it a little closer to maybe 2-3 range? Maybe. It may also be 3 to 5 because with Eli Drinkwitz, I think there's been parallel planning there. And that's a word that's gotten tossed around a little bit here. You're not negotiating. You're not conversing with one guy. You're working a few guys down the path here, 3, 4, 5, 6 maybe in this instance. But Drinkwitz's name has been the most consistent that I've heard. And that's coming from people in Columbia. That's coming from people in SEC country. That's coming from people in Big Ten territory. That's coming here locally. And it is the one that when you piece all that together, that is significant buzz where people are aligned in the conversations we're having and they don't know each other. I mentioned this on the board when we talk about buzz locally and everyone's getting excited here in State College. But when I check in with people in the agent world or I check in with people on that guy's campus and people are like, what are you talking about? That gives me some red flags because people who are here locally, they may not be talking to each other directly, having lunch with each other, but they are within the same structure, the same kind of the same ecosystem here in the Penn State universe. And so when you're hearing things from across the country and you're able to put that together, it's a little bit more notable to me. And with that said, I think beyond some of the names we've already just mentioned here, there's a few others. Brent Key. Now, this is one that seems to be more on fire here in State College than it is when I check in with the people connected to the agent world, than it is when I check in with people down in Atlanta, Georgia, who are close to that Georgia Tech program. He said a lot of things recently that backed his ass up against the wall about staying at Georgia Tech. He's a 4-year starter there as a player during a really good run for that Yellow Jackets program. He's been on this staff for several years. He was elevated to head coach a few years back, and he has this team in position to maybe go to the SEC championship game and get to the college football playoff. It required a comeback win against Boston College last week, but he got it done. And so with Brent Key right now, the word I get is, yeah, Penn State likes him. Penn State's prioritizing him in some manner, but there's a question about whether he would actually leave Atlanta, and if he were to leave Atlanta, whether he would leave it to go north versus staying south. And there are some job openings down there, and there may be some more to the south that could be enticing to him. So I'm just going to say that's one where you hear good things about Penn State, from Penn State, but you kind of broaden the horizons a little bit, and that doesn't necessarily hold up in the conversation regarding Brent Key. And so, look, we can work our way down the list a little bit. You've got Bob Chesney at JMU, been one of the more hotter names in the last 48 to 72 hours. Our understanding is he interviewed here on Sunday. It was impressive. The interview went well. It was coming off a 58-10 victory over Appalachian State. They're cruising in the Sun Belt Conference, but they're still got a roads to go to get college football playoff opportunity. And I've always said, if there's a coach who's going to leave his program before the college football playoff, if they were to make it, it's going to be a group of 5 coach. Anyone who thinks someone's leaving a powerhouse SEC program or a powerhouse Big Ten program for another job before they get to that first playoff game is crazy, because one, you're shortchanging your potential negotiation tactics. Why don't you go try to win a couple games and then see what your leverage looks like? Get to the national championship game, then see what your leverage looks like. And so in my mind, from a timing perspective, maybe that's a one playoff contender, JMU, where you can say, well, their coach might leave before they get to a playoff game. The thing with Chesney, though, is I have some questions because he is number one guy on UCLA's board right now. I've had that from 3 different sources in 3 different places. And UCLA, would they certainly feel the heat a little bit if they were hearing that things went really, really well in his Penn State interview and Pat Kraft really likes him? There's no reason why Chesney's representation wouldn't want the word out to be that things are working in a good direction with Penn State right now. My understanding is with Chesney, Virginia Tech, UCLA, and Penn State were the 3 that his reps were focused on. We already covered where Virginia Tech went. And so right now, it's still a name that I think is in the conversation, but I don't know that he's a priority for Penn State. And at this point, because we're nearing closing time, fellas, to me, if you're a priority, that means Pat Kraft is about to present you an offer. Because the feeling out process, the let's get to know each other process, that is largely come and gone. We were about to hit the 6-week mark. Decisions need to be made. And so there's just a scattering of names right there. I figured I'd throw at y'all at one time. Daniel, I want to get it to you. I love you have a pretty holistic view of college football that I think you provide for me sometimes and also for our message board. Of those names I just tossed out there, and as this process goes on for Penn State, anything particularly intrigue you?
I think DeBoer was the first one where my ears kind of perked up and I kind of was like, yeah, I think that raises the excitement level a little bit. I forget if you texted me that, or maybe we were in the parking lot after practice and when you brought it up. But to me, that was the first one that I think fits the bill of your, for lack of a better term, like a home run hire. I think that you're getting someone who I think is still on the upswing in the trajectory of his career, even if things at Alabama didn't necessarily go to plan. I think you're getting a coach who's not scared of anything. The fact that he was willing to take that Alabama job in those circumstances. He had the success at Washington. He had the success at Fresno State. You look at the work that he's done with quarterbacks over these past couple of years. We've seen Ty Simpson, I think, come into his own a little bit as a potential Heisman candidate. Now, he's done a lot of this in a marriage with Ryan Grubb as his offensive coordinator. I think that's a dynamic to keep an eye on, especially as Grubb is someone I think I've seen his name pop up on social media in connection with other jobs. So what exactly are you bringing? And I think also, the real, I can't think of the right term, maybe wild card, maybe ace up the sleeve. If you hire DeBoer, Courtney Morgan, that's his director of player personnel, who has built some really good teams over the years. I think that is a name that when you talk about DeBoer and the whole package, that you should keep in mind there. I think Tyler C can probably speak maybe a little bit more to that from the recruiting perspective. But I think DeBoer has a lot of different things that I am very intrigued by at this point.
Yeah. I also want to mention, because I feel like I'd be remiss, and we brought this up a bit on Monday, Terry Smith, a guy that we'll see how it goes the next couple of games. We know how it's going in the locker room. This has gone from a group that he described as traumatized in the wake of James Franklin's firing, and they kind of came across that way for the first couple of weeks, to now a group that's fired up, enthusiastic about playing for their coach. And I straight up asked a few different players yesterday during some calls, what it would be your case if Pat Kraft came and sat you down and said, why should we consider Terry Smith? And there were some passionate descriptions of the head coach there. And obviously we've said whether or not he's going to be your permanent head coach, and I still think the odds are not in the favor of that happening. He needs to be in the building. I'll just say that speaking with someone who's more on the national level and does a tremendous job in knowing what's happening in some of these coaching circles and agent circles, they've heard that in the last few days, it's at least entered the realm of possibility that Terry Smith could be considered here. Now, is that exactly what's cooking right now in Pat Kraft's office? I don't know. But there is something resonating a little bit, and I think part of it is probably people paying attention to how the team reacted on Saturday night. Pat Kraft was in that locker room with his arm around Terry as Nick Dawkins presented him the game ball. We all saw the press conference on Monday, and if they go out and they lose to Nebraska by 10, it's probably a moot point. But if they go out there, they look fired up and they continue to play for this coach, who knows? Maybe that's your best lifeline to keeping a roster intact. And I think that's where I want to bring you in now, Tyler. If you have anything to add on any of those names, have at it. But I'm curious to you what you think the timeline needs to look like if Penn State, A, wants to salvage its 2026 recruiting class and not just have to rely on leftovers in the February signing period, and B, be in a position with this new coach to retain key players and also be prepared to go on a mission and adding significant talent, starting talent, when that January transfer portal window opens.
I think late November when it comes to salvaging what's left of 26 and building that back up, because assuming obviously it's a sitting head coach somewhere, they're going to bring in their guys as well. So late November, get that ball rolling going into the early signing period. From a timeline perspective, I think that would be ideal for Penn State. And then for the portal stuff in the winter, you've got to bring in not just a head coach, but a support staff that is really, really well-versed in portal recruiting and being able to build out a roster that is ready to compete in year one. It's not an easy task. It really isn't, because the portal is so hit or miss. You can center in on certain guys who produced at their previous school, but there's no guarantee that it's going to play out in the same manner at the next stop. Even if you already know that kid, even if he's one of your guys from the past, there's just no telling. And with DeBoer, Daniel, you kind of stole my thunder there. He has proven that he can build a strong support staff and an on-field coaching staff littered with strong recruiters. So he's a name who would appeal to me in that regard. But whoever the hire is, timeline-wise, laid that out late November. I think that would be the best case scenario for Penn State. But whoever comes in has to have a grasp of what portal season really is, especially in this new landscape where there's not a spring window anymore. Remember, it's just the winter window from January 2nd to January 16th. That's all you've got to work with in terms of guys hitting the portal. That's your time to evaluate, examine, and decide who can help you in year one. Again, it's going to be really, really difficult to build up an entire roster, but that's what it's going to be for this next Penn State staff. So you've got to go in with a good feeling for how the portal works, and not just that, have an idea of your overall philosophy and approach in the portal. What do you want on the field? What do you want off the field? And where are you willing to commit your dollars and cents positionally from an NIL and rev share perspective?
We're going to have day-to-day, hour-to-hour, minute-to-minute coverage of this damn coach search for the rest of the way, until we get to the finish line. And then we get a whole other kind of conversation after that with the staff filling out. And remember that whatever head coach takes this job, assuming it's a sitting head coach, the conversation will be how many guys is he bringing from his campus? How many players is he bringing from his campus? How many recruits is he bringing from his recruiting class if the timeline matches out like that? So that's something to keep in mind here. But just a few notes, I think, to consider for everybody. I put this on our message board yesterday. We are so locked in on what's happening from Penn State and its desires here. And that's our focal point largely at Lions247.com and on this podcast. But this is a four-pronged conversation, people. Two, there's the coaching candidates themselves. They have families, they have long-term motives that very few would even understand, and maybe outside of their home household. And so that's in play there. Three, the agents. Can't forget about the agents. Their job is to be as diligent as possible. And in that case, that means maximizing the moment for their client. And this is a moment for their client, for a guy like Eli Drinkwitz, for a guy like Bob Chesney, that may never come again in their careers. This may be that one lightning in a bottle chance to maximize yourself financially, long-term commitments, all the stuff that coaches want from their universities in terms of NIL money and all the different allocations. This is also that happening right now. The agents are doing everything, every angle. Three, the universities that currently employ these coach candidates, they are in play here. What's their conviction and what they're willing to do to keep these coaches on their current campuses? What are they willing to invest from a financial standpoint? What is their wherewithal as a university right now to be able to support and retaining and adding staff members, to be able to, what's most important here, build the necessary rosters with the monetary means that now takes. And then the fourth the last thing is there, you can't focus on one of those things. You can't focus on two of those things. You got to be looking at least three or four. Otherwise, you risk missing the big picture here. And I think that they're all going to be in play going down the wire. Guys, anything else to add before we wrap up this conversation? As I said, we'll all be doing our parts to provide coverage of this process over at Lions247.com every single day.
Yeah, I think I remember the day after James Franklin got fired, or when we first started talking about this search, we said that's a marathon, not a sprint. And I think we're getting into the sprinting portion
Yeah.
of it with the way things are going. So, I know that people have been kind of waiting for different shoes to drop and everything like that, but it does feel like that it's finally getting to be about that time.
Never run a marathon myself, guys. My mom has run about 30 of them. And there's that period of like, you start off really fast and it's exciting and you're taking in the scenery. And then there's like mile 10 through mile 20 where you're just trying to pace yourself, survive, make sure you're getting your electrolytes. And then you get to that final stretch and people are like, you're almost there. And you can start to see that mile marker going up. Then you kick it into a different gear. Maybe someday I'll do it myself. But yeah, I think you make a great point, Daniel. You want to have that sprint to the finish line. And by the way, when you're in a race and there's other people trying to sprint to the finish line, Florida, LSU, Auburn, yeah, there's motivation to kick it into a different gear. Tyler, anything else to throw in here?
Man, it's been
Wait, hold on. That is the sound effect, or if you watched on YouTube, that is really a good summation of what Tyler's job has been the last 5 weeks.
Yeah, I can't wait for the next head coach to get hired, to be completely honest with you. People will enjoy what I have to put out there again. But no, in all seriousness, I think that, like I said earlier, it's going to be a really busy stretch once the new head coach is named. Between retention of the current roster, retention of the remaining 26 class, the likely, I think you could probably even say inevitable flips that will come along with the sitting head coach arriving at Penn State. And then once portal season kicks off in January, I mean, we're going to be swamped with roster and recruiting movement. So while James Franklin, now that he's at Virginia Tech, you're seeing Virginia Tech get that boost with the new head coach hire. They're going to generate a lot of buzz on the recruiting trail. And I think a lot of people are probably feeling a little bit down about that as Penn State continues its search for a new head coach. There's going to become a time where Penn State is in this same exact situation. So stay tuned. There should be movement to report on sooner rather than later, depending on how the search plays out. But, I mean, you guys have been killing it on your end. So I'm just kind of waiting in the wings at this point.
And folks, I'm going to call an audible. I know I promised you, and I know there's so many of you stuck through these 41 minutes just hoping to get a word from the Nebraska Cornhuskers Insider. We're going to couch that for now. We're going to add that on to our preview episode because I think this is a good standalone episode. We've also gone over 40 minutes. So I'm just making that move right now. Whatever. It works for me. I hope it works for all of you. So next episode, it will drop probably Thursday afternoon into Thursday evening, perhaps. It will be Mark, Daniel, and myself giving you everything we saw from the practice field, what we heard from Terry Smith and some players, and really setting the stage for Penn State's next opportunity to go pick up a victory, maybe put together a late win streak here on Saturday night against Nebraska. So stay tuned for that. We'll also bring in the Cornhuskers Insider. He'll give us all his feedback on what he's anticipating. But guys, appreciate your perspective, appreciate your work on the site, and I guess we'll get back to it. On behalf of Tyler and Daniel, I am the other Tyler, Donahue, and this has been the Lions 24/7 podcast.